All right, those leaf discs used to be sunk to the bottom. Now they're floating to the top. What happened? What's going on there? Let's see. Angel, what did you and your table mates talk about? So, okay, soap. Making. So that's interesting. So what does soap make? What can soap make? If you put a bunch of soap in the water, what happens to the water? Bubbles, right? Well, do bubbles float? So could bubbles from the soap make the leaf float, maybe? That's a good idea. So I'm going to add, so soap is making them float, making bubbles, right? So I like that idea. That's interesting. That kind of makes sense. Yeah. Soap. Yeah, the soap in the water. I like that. I didn't expect that. Janelle, what's your thought? What could be making? Got light shining on those leaves, those discs. What could be happening to make them now float, rise up, like the Titanic rising? But not the Titanic, we're talking about leaves. Any thought? No thought? Okay. Gotta be equitable. All right, Ezekiel, what's your thought? What's making them float up? They're becoming lighter. So we know light things float, right? So I'm going to put that down. Discs are becoming lighter. Can't write over the video, I discovered. I'm right here. So that's basically the answer, but let's dive into it. Why are they becoming lighter? Any idea? What's happening to make them lighter? Okay, you want some help? Okay, Amy, enlighten us. Well, yeah, the light's going into the leaf, and then the light itself is not making them lighter, but something that light's doing for the leaves, which are plants. Does that help? We're fine? Jesus? So what do you think? I like that. It's good. Makes oxygen. Oxygen. We know that trees give us oxygen, right? Plants give us oxygen. So is oxygen being made in those plants? For sure. That's making bubbles, right? And bubbles we know float. That's why it's interesting. You also know soap makes bubbles. And we're going to use soap in this lab, Jesus, but not to make bubbles. We don't want bubbles, but we're going to do it to make the water sink the leaves more effectively. But I'll talk about more of that later. So, discs are becoming lighter. Oxygen is being made by, what's that process called? Photosynthesis. Made by photosynthesis. Okay? And let's go even further. The leaves, they're not gaining mass. They're just being surrounded by gas. So they're not getting lighter technically, but compared to the water, they're getting lighter. You remember middle school, you remember what makes things float or sink? It has to do with a concept that starts with D. The discs become less DE. Less dense. Yeah, you've heard about density, right? So if you're denser than water, if you weigh more per milliliter, then you're going to sink. If you weigh less per milliliter, then you float. That's a concept called buoyancy. You guys heard that word before? Buoyancy. Stuff, if it's less dense, it's buoyant. If it's denser, it's not buoyant anymore. Like, you ever wonder how heavy things can float? Like, does the Queen Mary weigh a lot? Yeah, it does. Whew, all that metal. But did it float at one point? Yes, it did. By the way, right now it doesn't float. It's just sitting there on mud. It's not floating at all. That's kind of crazy. It looks like it's floating, right? But it's not. They're lying. They're tricking us. But it's easier to just have it. You know, you don't want to be floating around if you're on the hotel, right? You're going to get sick. Right, Disney? You want it stable. At least I do. So yeah, a big ship made out of all that metal and all that stuff. It can float because it's more buoyant than the water. It's less dense than the water. Because is water heavy? If you get hit by a water bottle, is that going to hurt? Is that going to hurt? Probably. Water's heavy. If I have you carry a bucket of water around, you're not going to like that, are you? No, it's heavy. Can you make a boat out of concrete? Could you? Yes, you can, and they do. Engineering departments do that all the time. It's like concrete boat building competition. They make a boat, like a canoe, out of concrete. Seems counterintuitive, right? It's heavy, but water's heavier. As long as you displace more water that's heavier than the concrete, you're good to go. Okay? So today we're going to explore this concept of density, things sinking, things floating.